Hello and welcome everybody. This is Saumya Tandon. Here I am. And today I'm talking about a book, Always a Foreigner, a memoir by Ashwini Devare, the author who talks about her life, her growing up, in various countries across the world against the backdrop of major historical events. By the time she was 15, actually, she had been in 6 countries. Being a daughter of an IFS officer, she witnessed life in Soviet Union, Seoul, Sikkim, Burma, and it's a beautiful book, which is a metamorphosis of a young girl who desperately wants to fit in to a self assured, successful journalist and now an acclaimed writer. I'm so pleased to announce that I have the author Ashwini Devare with me today for a conversation. Ashwini, a huge welcome.
Thank you so much, Saumya, for this lovely introduction. It's a privilege.
I'm so delighted to have you, Ashwini. First, I have to tell you that when I got my copy, my husband thought that I was very obsessed with it because I wouldn't put it down. And it is so engaging. The writing is so spontaneous and fluid, and it's so genuine and honest that I just couldn't put it down till I finished. So first, I would like to say huge congratulations. This is amazing.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So Ashwini, the first question that comes to my mind is Always a Foreigner. Why this title?
I think you touched upon it in your introduction. This title actually pretty much symbolizes my life from the time I was born, which was in Moscow, till the time, every 2 to 3 years, I was a foreigner not just in a different country, but in a different continent. So it was like being a new girl every 2 years, every 3 years. So I think this title was something that I didn't really have to think too hard about because this was just my life. And I remember at the age of 15, when I came to India, to Pune, I joined a school in Pune and I thought, great, I'm back home. This is the country that I belong to. This is where I'm going to feel, there's going to be no feeling of being a foreigner here. But to my surprise and to my shock, rather, I felt completely out of place because I was, something about me spelled foreigner. To all the girls who were around me studying, I just looked out of place, or maybe it was the way I spoke or the way I looked. So even back home in Pune, I felt, like this new girl. It was an act almost that I had sort of perfected of being the new girl. But, over time, that feeling whittled away and India sort of began to feel like home.
Right. Ashwini, I grew up in a very academic family, and for me, being an IFS officer was always so glamorous, so posh. It was, such an aspirational job for all of us. But there is also another side to it, which people don't know about, they don't talk, is that how the families really have to adjust. The kids probably, will be a little bit disoriented because every time they have to learn and unlearn in different environments. It is tough. So what would you like to say about that? Was it tough?
It was tough. In fact, one of the reasons I wrote the book was to sort of deconstruct the myth, the glamour about the foreign service, right? It was a difficult life for children because it was disruptive. It was, we were flung from one country to another every 2 to 3 years. And the swings were very disruptive it was going from, it was one extreme to the other. So if you were in Washington, then we landed in Sikkim 2 years later. If we were in Switzerland, we landed in Burma 3 years later. There was almost a joke in the ministry that if you had lived a comfortable life for 3 years, brace yourselves, because after 3 years, you're going to be banished to the back of beyond. And that's what kept happening. And the thing is, we had no idea where we were going to go, which country we were going to be sent to. That all depended on the bosses and MEA in Delhi. So it was always a guessing game. And in fact, my sister devised this game called Name of Countries, Game of Names, actually, because we had no idea we had no idea where we would end up being. So that was hard. And there were some countries where there was no Indian food. So for my mother, that was a challenge. I mean, there was no dal, chawal, atta, sabji. It was, we used to wait for shipments to come in from some countries, like
Wow.
bring that kind of stuff. So in Korea, for instance, there was no Indian provision shop when we were there. So there were some things like that. And of course, schooling. I mean, education was a huge challenge because
Yeah.
I remember when we were in Burma, I was clubbed together in a classroom where the seventh, eighth, and ninth was all clubbed together. And I was the
Oh,
oldest in the class. So it was very disruptive because there was no proper education system really, wherever
yeah.
we were.
And imagine learning languages, new languages every time.
So that's in back in the 70s and 80s where my book is set. We went to local schools because, of course, English medium schools were very expensive. So we went to whichever country we were in, we attended the local school.
Right.
And I remember, so we were posted to Switzerland, which sounds very glamorous. But actually, when the street reality was that I was the only person of color and in that school that I attended, and nobody spoke a word of English. And my
Wow.
father was like, of course she'll adjust. What's there? She'll learn the language. What he didn't realize was that the entire curriculum was in French, including history and
Wow.
geography and math. So it was a deep sea diving, cultural immersion from head to toe, which we had to do every 2 to 3 years.
Right.
So I think that was the most challenging part for us kids, and also, of course, as a teenager, you don't want to stick out. You want to be invisible, right? So in every country, you became so conspicuous because of who you were, the language, your identity. It became like an identity crisis every time we were
Right.
in a new place. Yeah.
Also, Ashwini, you speak so beautifully about everybody who's been in your life, especially your family, how your father was, such a dedicated person, for his country. Your mother, who was barely married, and just a few days after her marriage, she was flung into a foreign land. Your sister, who has a very different personality than yours, but you have a great bond. So when did you really think that you were ready to put yourself and your family and your relations out there in public? Was
So
that like
my
and what do they think about it when they read about it?
Well, it was not a very conscious decision. It just happened that I started thinking that I have all this material and I really feel like writing about this. And my first book was actually a collection of short stories because I was a little bit daunted to write a memoir because the general view is, oh, you have to be a celebrity to write a memoir. Why would anyone care about your story? But actually that I think is really the biggest stumbling block, is that anybody can write a memoir. There's no
Right.
prescribed age and stage and eligibility requirement to write a memoir. So for me, I think because I was studying journalism, I realized that there had been so many watershed events that had taken place in all these countries that we had been posted in. When my father was first posted to Moscow as a junior diplomat, the lowest on the pecking order, that's when the embassy of Moscow became a nerve center because Tashkent happened and
Right.
Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri died. It happened then when he was there. So history was being written in front of our eyes. Then when we moved to Washington, there were all kinds of historical events taking place, right from the Vietnam War to Neil Armstrong walking on the moon to the Cold War. When we moved to Sikkim, it was a kingdom, a monarchy, which was not part of India. And really pretty much in front of our eyes, it ended up becoming a part of India. And so on and so forth. So every country was in the throes of extraordinary changes. And my father, as you mentioned, he was extremely devoted to his country. He put his duty above everything else. My mother was starry-eyed and quite intoxicated by this world of diplomacy and going to new countries. She was an eternal optimist. And I think both of them were so curious and so optimistic and free-spirited. I just wanted to, in some ways, pay a tribute to them through this book because it was their joie de vivre, their ability to embrace, adopt, and adjust to all these environments. It sort of kind of trickled down on us as well, my sister and me. Yeah.
Right. So, Ashwini, you have spoken about so many countries. In fact, you've lived in so many countries. If you have a chance to revisit, which country would you like to go to and why?
You know, I feel like I would like to visit all these countries today because there's some of these countries I've not gone back to because I didn't want to
Right.
disturb my memory of it. But I would love to visit Sikkim again because I haven't gone back. Would love to see South Korea again because that's where I was a teenager. And of course, Moscow, where I was born. So I think if I could only do this journey all over again as an adult, I probably could. I would love to do that.
Yeah. That would be probably another book, revisiting my life post.
Post pandemic, yes.
Also, Ashmi, like you spoke about, so many historical events which happened and you witnessed all of them while you were there. If I would say, if I would ask which one of them or which country really impacted your life or had a deep impression on you?
That's a very good question. All the countries today, what I am, I mean, I'm shaped by all these countries that I lived in. I would say what I remember most vividly, of course, is South Korea, because when we were in Korea, it was still transitioning from, from a developing to a developed country. It was under a military dictatorship, and suddenly it became a democracy because of those thousands of students who took to the streets. And it was very inspiring to see these students. I mean, they were thronging the streets, and we were in the embassy. My father was, through his window, could see all those thousands of demonstrators. He would come home and tell us about the things that were happening. And I think my father's, he would come home and we would sit around the dining table and he would tell us all the things that were happening in our host country. So, in that sense, Soumya, for me, I think history. I became a student of history all over again while writing this book.
Yeah.
And it also made me realize the importance of history because, history, you take lessons from the past and you apply them to the present and the future. And history catches up in unimaginable ways. So I think you can't really run away from history. And I think that's what I learned while writing this memoir. For instance, in Tashkent in 1966, when the agreement was signed, it was the Russians were mediating the peace agreement between India and Pakistan after the Indo-Pak War in 1965. And it was very interesting that a few years ago, when the Pulwama attack happened in India, once again, Russian Premier Putin was offering to mediate. The only thing that had changed was the backdrop. Back then in the 60s, it was the Cold War. Today, the backdrop is global terrorism. But so much is still very much the same. I think, that's what I learned a lot about history while I was writing this book, and it made me recognize the importance of it, really.
But it's so enriching to witness all of this. It's so enriching to, to live life in different cultures, different countries, be exposed to that kind of, knowledge through your father. You really have a very privileged childhood also, I would say. How has it shaped you? I mean, what have you learned from it, rather?
Yeah, well, Soumya, I think you're right. The world became my classroom from a very young age, and I learned to appreciate different countries, cultures, different types of people. And I think the takeaway for me was, of course, it taught me to step out of my comfort zone from a very young age. And I also realized that change is not such a bad thing. It's how you cope with change, really, that makes a difference. And the other thing I think that was important was to stay curious. And I think that the minute, we become complacent or we become um, cynical and we
Yeah.
lose that curiosity, I think that's when, you lose out. And I think as a child, I have to admit that I kept thinking, I didn't really sign up for this. Why do I have to say goodbye to friends every 2 years? Why do I have to go to a new school every 2 years? This is not fair. But I think, of course, as an adult, I can look back with the hindsight of being an adult and having that maturity that, yes, of course, it shaped me in so many ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I
I
mean,
mean, I've become a global citizen.
I'm sure it must have been very tough, but I would say that I mean, if I see from here, from far away, I would say it is such a privilege to have been there in so many countries and witness these historical events and learn from different cultures. I would say beautiful, beautiful life.
Thank you,
Ashwini,
Soumya.
what's your writing process? How do you
Um,
write?
well, During the pandemic, I experienced FOMO because I'm looking around and seeing all these authors churning out books. Every 2 years, 3 years, there's a new book, and I have to admit that it was my creative juices did not flow during the pandemic, and being in lockdown and not being able to meet friends and family, being away from family actually was difficult. But I have to say that writing is like a job. I think people have this illusion that, oh, you wait, you get inspired, you go to a beach, you look at these beautiful flowers, and you write something poetic. It doesn't work like that, at least for me. I feel the more you write, the better you get. So you go every day and attack it like a job. It's like riyaz. The more riyaz you do, the better you sing. So I really look at it as something that's structured, and that's something that requires a lot of discipline, and which can be terribly boring because there are days when you go in and write one paragraph, you go in the next day and you delete that paragraph. So writing is all about rewriting,
Yeah.
editing, and you're very lucky if you get a page or two of good writing in a day. So I think it's challenging and it's very solitary. As everybody says, it is a lonely job.
It
uh,
is. I remember once me and my husband, we were meeting Gulzar Sahab, and he said that I, like a clerk, sit on my table at 8 o'clock in the morning and sit on my table till 6 o'clock in the evening or probably later. And I do my job just like anybody else in an office job. It's got nothing glamorous about it.
yes.
And I just do it with that discipline. I mean, you know, so true that it is actually a very, very difficult job, and you just have to be with yourself. So, well
And
said.
Soumya, for me, it was an easy thing because right from my childhood, I was used to being alone. Because
Yeah.
I would have my desk in all the countries that we were in. One thing was constant: I had a desk, and that desk would sort of become like my sanctuary, like a refuge. I would sit there and write my diaries. I'm a big diary writer. And when the world around us was hostile or so alien, it was just hunkering in and writing that was very therapeutic, actually. And that was an early habit that I acquired. That, oh, if you're not feeling so great, maybe you can write something, and you do feel better. At least I do. I do when I write. I feel a lot better.
So, Ashwini, now that I'm already your fan, what am I going to expect from you next?
Well, I'm hoping to write some fiction next. I think the memoir has run its course, and I'm very happy that I did it. But now it's time to move on and explore new uncharted territories. I would love to write a novel. Let's hope that happens.
Though I must say that this book is so replete with such dramatic and heartwarming events. I think this should be just converted into a show or a movie. It just needs to be quickly discovered. And who is going to be that lucky person?
And who's going to play the lead? I think it has to be you.
Wow, fingers crossed.
Yes,
Looking forward.
absolutely.
I'm sure there are a lot of people. If there are any questions that anybody would like to ask Ashwini, um, let's take those questions. So Ashwini, someone's asking, where are you based now?
Okay, I'm based in Singapore, where life has come a full circle. And after all that traveling and meandering and wandering around, I have been here for now quite some time. And in one of the questions you asked me about this nomadic life and how what a privilege it was to have a nomadic life. But I used to look at it the other way and say, I envied people who had the stability. I envied people who had the permanence of being in one single geographic place, because that gives you a huge amount of confidence. It gives you a lot of self-esteem because you've grown up with the same people, your same neighbors, your family. And I think that there's something to be said about that permanence and the sort of confidence it brings in a person. But yes, I'm in Singapore now.
So this is Kishnendu Ghosh, and he's asking you, writing on a laptop versus writing on a diary with pen, which one do you prefer?
Great question, because I'm one of those people who loves writing with a pen, and I have lots of notebooks. Um, I have almost like a fetish for notebooks. I keep collecting them, and I love jotting things down in pen and paper. Nothing like the good old pen. But of course, the books I've written on my laptop, but everything else goes into my notebooks.
There's another question from Ketki Pandey, and she's asking you, which was your favorite city and why?
That's a very good question. My memories of Gangtok are very evocative, and they're sort of like a childlike memory. So in that sense, it's a very beautiful, undisturbed memory of this Himalayan hillside and wildflowers and beautiful women in bakus and those momos that we used to eat as children, and just the cinematic, the landscape of Gangtok with the palace on one side and the India House on the other side. I would say Gangtok.
Right. And the other question is from Amit Bhartiya. He's asking, how do we feel at home given context of COVID? And if one is stuck at foreign country, one can't go home.
Good question. And that brings you to the concept of home. For a long time, I was in search of home. I was looking for a place that I could call home. Somewhere in my mind, I would say Pune is my home because my family is from Pune. And I would say that is my home. Now, over the years, I feel home is an abstract imagery. Home, you can have many homes. Home is where you're happy, home is where your family is. So for me today, I'm so happy that I have many places I can call home. And I think if you're more fluid about these concepts, it's easier to feel happier and to be able to, combat those pangs that you might feel. Perhaps if you're from the diaspora, there's always that pang to want to go back home being India. And but it's once again, it's really about that mindset. And if you're happy where you are, that can be your home.
So true. Anu Raju Kankipati is asking you, actually is saying that you've had a incredible life journey across such diverse and different countries and culture, shaped your interests and led you to a lifelong interest in history and geopolitics and to writing and journalism. Fabulous and interesting memoir. Looking forward to your next work.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Ashwini, you said that you were going to be writing something in fiction. Can we kind of get a little sneak peek, and can we be a little cheeky and ask you what is going in your head?
I'm very private about my forthcoming book because it's still at a very early stage. But I think because I'm a journalist, I'm very drawn to history and I'm very drawn to geopolitics. So you are going to get a cocktail mix of a lot of geopolitics. You're going to get that history, which I can't escape from. And perhaps that's going to be the backdrop of a love story. But I've never written a love story, so I don't know. It's going to be challenging. But that's what I'm thinking right now.
Yeah, and that is the thing which is very beautiful about this book, is that you've balanced your personal life so beautifully with whatever is happening around. So that beautiful balance we've already seen in this book. Rahul Bhatt is asking you, have you written anything special in pandemic or lockdown?
I wrote some journalistic pieces during lockdown because I found that came to me naturally because I was quite troubled by everything that was happening, and especially gender issues, issues of domestic violence. So I wrote a few pieces for some of the local newspapers about the surge in mental health issues and domestic violence, actually. I wrote about that for some of the regional newspapers.
Right.
And I managed to get a blurb out for my novel. I think just writing a blurb or a synopsis, Saumya, can be the most difficult thing. And I remember for my previous book, I left it for the very end. And then it was a challenge to try to summarize an entire 300-page book into one paragraph. So this time I decided I'll do it the reverse. So I managed to get a blurb done during the pandemic.
Right. This is a very, very interesting question, Ashwini. I think a lot of aspiring writers, are going to benefit from this. Rupa Publications is asking you to answer this. Can you share some tips on writing, especially memoir writing?
Right. Memoir writing can be tricky because first of all, you have to differentiate between writing an autobiography and a memoir. An autobiography, typically, you'll see sports athletes, film stars, people like you, Saumya, will write autobiographies, which are tend to be, about all the events that have happened with you, and public will be aware of them. And with a memoir, it's sort of a borderline with fiction. So I remember doing a few courses on memoir writing before I embarked on Always a Foreigner, where the idea is to approach it like fiction. So these are characters. You have to have a cinematic setting. You have to write it in a literary way so that it is not an autobiography or very chronological. It is a slice of life rather than each and everything that you've gone through. So the memoir should read like a fiction book, actually. That was a very key thing I learned before I embarked on writing this. Make sure you have your characters. So for me in my book, there was mom, dad, and my sister, but I didn't look at them through a lens of necessarily them being mom, dad, and sister. They were characters. And so when I had that distance from them, they acquired their own personalities and became a little bit more, I was able to flesh them out a little bit better than I would have if I had stuck to that structure of, my parents and my sister.
Yeah, so well said. Um, Pragun Sinha is asking, which book is your favorite?
I have a bookshelf full of my favorite books. It's very hard to pick on one. I would,
if you had to pick, maybe say top three.
I would. I always go back to God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy because it just, when I read it, I was not able to get it out of my mind. I was haunted by it for a long time. Even now, I'm sometimes scared to reread it because it'll disturb me. And it's a book that I will consider to be one of my most favorite books even now. There's really too many books. Really, it's hard to say. But of course, Midnight's Children was another book that I sometimes revisit because of its spectacular writing and the expanse. The whole canvas of it was incredible. And I've also liked a Malaysian writer, Tan Tuan Eng. If you haven't read it, it's called Garden of the Evening. Garden of the Evening Mist is a genre that I really enjoyed because again, it has history, it has Japanese history, it has the Cameron Highlands in Malaysia, so it's very evocative. So, these three different books, I would say, are some of my favorite readings.
So from this list, probably the last one is the one I'll have to read. The other two I have already read. G. Mar, were you able to form long-lasting bonds with your continuous movement around the world? Yeah, nice question.
Biggest regret in life, I don't have all these thousands of WhatsApp groups of high school friends and middle school friends and college friends. None of that. First of all, no social media back then. And I sometimes wonder where those people are who I met. There was this one girl in South Korea, in Seoul, Korean girl. When I said goodbye to her, I guess I didn't realize I would never see her again or never hear from her again. But I tried to find her on Facebook, but I haven't been able to. There was another girl in Geneva who she was really friendly and nice to me when everybody else was a little bit hostile and not necessarily friendly, but she was extremely nice. And once again, I have no idea where she is. Isabel was her name. But I think that was the biggest downside to just having no lasting friendships to this nomadic life. Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Shubhi Chabra is asking, do you have a favorite writing time of the day?
Mornings. I can't, I'm not one of those artists who can get up at 3 a.m. and produce a spectacular draft. I just can't do that. I'm a morning person. I love mornings. That's when I try to do all my writing. Of course, it's easier said than done. Mornings also get wasted a fair bit with coffee breaks and wandering around. But I must say I'm a morning person. And when I look out the window and it's a beautiful, clear day, I just want to go and start writing. So I'm very inspired by mornings.
Deep Chakrabarti has a very interesting question. He says, do you think the post colonial literature is somehow overshadowed by British literature in India in terms of inclination of people?
In terms of inclination of people, well, if I interpret his question correctly, is post-colonial literature overshadowed by British literature? I would say it isn't so anymore, because I've become a huge fan of modern Indian writing.
Yeah.
And what we have seen today is an explosion of our own homegrown, indigenous, beautiful literature, which is our very own writing. And the world has appreciated it, because you've seen Indian writers have done so well in this post-colonial period, in fact. And there is a there is a youthful energy to our writers today, which is unique, because India is one of the youngest countries in the world with one of the most youthful demographic, and that is being reflected in our writing. So when you look at the oeuvre of writing that's coming out of the new writers today, it's full of energy, it's full of vigor, and it's very bold, and it is raw, it's unfiltered, and I think that's not what we saw in the earlier literature. There's a big shift, which I personally feel has happened.
So true. Ashwini, any other books that you would recommend us to read? To read actually. I have a book club where I keep keep suggesting books, and I take advice from people, and I talk about the book that I have read. I have made a pledge that I'm going to read one book a month. And of course, this month it is this, though I have already read it. I actually read it in one day, by the way.
Okay.
Thanks to your thanks to your great writing style. It was so
Thank you.
engaging. So definitely, Always a Foreigner will be the book for this month. But any advice that you would like to give to my book club readers?
Well, at the moment, I'm reading The Anarchy or Anarchy, however you would pronounce it, by William Dalrymple, which again is fascinating. I do love nonfiction. So it's taking me right through the history of the East India Company, and I'm finding it quite fascinating. So that's a book I would recommend. The other book that's open on my Kindle is American Marriage by Tayari Jones, because it gives you a whole different insight into American marriages and people in the people caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, and then how their lives can be impacted by something that's completely out of their control. Very fascinating book. I'm quite enjoying that as well. And because I've written a memoir, I gravitate towards memoirs. And if you haven't read Educated by Tara Westover, that's a wonderful memoir. Tara Westover's Educated.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Ashwini. This was so delightful. It was so lovely to speak with you. I'm really looking forward to your fiction book. I'm going to keep my eyes wide open.
Thank you.
Really, really waiting. And I think the world is waiting to see this book turn into a show very soon. And I'm going to take you on that when you said that I could be a part of it and play you. So I'm going to take you on that.
I don't. If I could just say this, there was somebody in Mumbai who brought this up and said, "Oh, it tick marks all the three boxes. It has history, it has cinematic setting, and it has a lot of drama. All it needs is a lead actress." So there you go.
Oh, now we have everything. We just need a great director.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Anybody out there, anybody hearing, this is a great and golden opportunity. So I would like to tell everybody that this book is available in Crossword. The link will be there on the post. Quickly go grab your copy, not to be missed. And I promise you are not going to put it down and you're going to read it like me in one go. Huge congratulations, Ashwini. What a pleasure it was to speak with you. Big hug.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Saumya. It was a pleasure to interact with you and with all the readers. Thank you to Rupa and Crossword. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Rupa and Crossword. Thank you.